bit of a scary subject, this food security subject, because it makes you start thinking about where we could be or may not be in 20 or 30 years' time. Still with me in the studio, Dr. Florence McCrystal, Director at Agrifica, Kulani Machaba, Registration and Regulatory Affairs Manager at Pioneer Hi-Bred International, and joining us from our bureau in Nairobi, Dr. Florence Wambugo, who is the CEO of Africa Harvest. Talking about food security, Kulani, do we need, we've been talking, we've almost sort of kept this only in Africa.
Yes.
But do we need any form of international intervention here or international involvement to try and get this, this is going to sound awful, get this thing growing?
Definitely. Definitely. There is not a single government or a single company or a single organization that can operate on its own to solve the food challenges that we're experiencing in Africa. We need a collective approach across all companies, across different kind of governments, and we need global cooperation.
Now, Afro-pessimists would turn around and say, well, the reason why you're not producing enough food is because you just don't do it yourselves. You rely on aid. But this is, as you were saying during the break, this is a lot, Doctor, about economies of scale.
Absolutely. Let me come back to a point that we were talking about right at the beginning. Africa has got the potential not only to feed itself, but to be a major exporter of food. Climatically...
But why aren't we doing it then?
Well, it's largely because of the way the agriculture in Africa is structured. It's been divided up into small-scale farmers. Governments have tended to dominate. Take Nigeria, for example. For years and years, while they depended entirely on their oil revenue and totally neglected agriculture, Nigeria was a major producer of food. So was Angola, so was Mozambique, so was Zimbabwe. All of those countries were exporters of food. And then politics got in the way. And today they're way back to below where they used to be. And it all is about the governmental structure, the policies that have been put in place. In most, I'm sorry to say it, but in most African countries, in my experience until comparatively recently, agriculture was not a high priority for them. The other things were much more sexy and generated more revenue for those in authority. Sad to say.
Dr. Wambugo, I'm going to put this one to you. How do we start slapping politicians across the back of their heads to get them to understand how vitally important this aspect is to Africa?
Well, I think it's beginning to happen when people begin to demonstrate in the streets because of the food prices. That has happened in a number of African countries when people have gone to the streets. And these are voters. Then the politicians begin to pay attention when they realize that hungry people are going to be agri people, and some of them may not come back to the parliament because they did not pay attention to the food production. But far and large, what we need is policies that are going to, and I don't think we can do it without political will. I agree with Kulani. We need all the players. We need local and seed company, local and international, multinational seed companies. We need bilateral donors. We need everybody. But the leadership must come from Africa. The leadership must be there to focus on the production at the grassroots level, large scale and small scale. The question is, see, for example, we have done it so well with tea and coffee. How comes we can't do it with food? It can be done.
Everyone's nodding in the Johannesburg studio, so I take it you all agree with this. But I want to move on to another area here, which is something that's been raised on this show in various other forms, is other companies, other countries buying into Africa. I do believe that I read at some stage that I think it was Indonesia, bought vast tracts of land in Madagascar, I think it was. to ensure that they had places where they could grow rice, for example. Dr. McCrystal, is this happening? Is this a threat? Are we selling off our arable land to other countries to ensure their food security?
It's happening in patches. It's not pervasive, but there are spots where it's happening. And big chunks of land, India, for example, Indian interests have taken big chunks of land. Now, and I guess China will too. So yes, it is happening. And it seems to me that it'll be a great pity that if this becomes yet another political interference, Africa must look to itself. And I quite agree with the comment that was made that the leadership in Africa has got to take responsibility for developing agriculture in Africa. And Africa can do it. And the know-how is here. In South Africa, we've got the know-how. And if necessary, we can buy the know-how. But we must take the lead. Africa must take its own lead.
Why is it that politicians seem to be the ones who always mess everything up in everything? Look, the one thing they've got no control over is climate change. You guys must obviously, Kulani, be looking at climate change specifically in Africa and how to adapt. Is this going to have a serious effect on where we go in the future?
Yes. The focus now on agricultural production globally is on sustainable agricultural production. So many companies are now using technologies that ensure that there's less impact on the environment, there's less degradation, there's better conservation of resources, and also mitigate against the effect of climate change. There's various kind of technologies that are being used, including in South Africa, to mitigate against the negative impacts of climate change.
I've got to raise the two letters in this particular one.
Yes.
Genetically modified.
Yes.
What is the story here?
With genetically modified organisms, the story is that plant breeding technologies have been used to transfer, for instance, genes from one species to another. I'll give an example with GM maize, which we are growing commercially in South Africa. And by the way, more than 70% of our maize production in South Africa to date is GM maize. So what has happened there is that scientists have transferred a gene from a bacillus, soringensis, which is a bacterium, to maize plants. And with this gene having been transferred there, when stalk borers, which are a major problem in maize production, they can cause yield losses ranging from 10 to 40%. When they feed on maize, they die. But the genes have been transferred so precisely in a way that it has been proven by scientific studies conducted in many parts of the world that they target this particular, the proteins expressed in the plants due to the integration of these genes, target only these particular pest problems, which are lepidopteran species that include stalk borers.
Dr. Wambugo, to you now. There's been a pushback in Africa from a fair amount of states against genetically modified maize, for example. Let's just use that as an example. What is your view on this?
Well, I believe that the GM crops have got their own place. There are areas where they are able to have an impact. They have been demonstrated, especially in cotton and in maize, to have an impact. But when we come to the issue of climatic change, I believe the answer lies beyond just GM to diversification, looking for crops that are drought tolerant. For example, God in his wisdom knew that Africa will one day become a very dry country, and crops like sorghum is very drought tolerant, is tolerant to heat, is tolerant to drought, is tolerant to waterlogging, and is a crop that has been neglected despite that it actually is indigenous to Africa. It's a time to look in. And we have got other crops like cowpea that are indigenous to Africa that have very high levels of tolerance. So I think the answer again lies inside Africa, but at the same time, agree we need to partner with the international community to look for other bigger solutions. And I think it's absolutely easier and quicker to multiply and increase the crops that we have other than just import, because that takes a while to really get the whole system going. So I think, again, we need a balanced solution here. And I think diversifying, looking inside, what is it that we have that we can multiply and bring to the food, to the table, like these drought-tolerant crops that are all over Africa, is maybe a quick solution to this.
I've just solved the problems of Africa. Me and Dr. Wambugo have just solved the problems of Africa while we were talking there. Surely, what we as Africans should be doing is looking at the crops that we can grow viably in our area and starting to develop those and package them up and market them to the rest of the world as something that they really want and really need. And in that way, we don't have to worry about growing plants that we can't really because of the conditions. Come on, the economist on the panel. Have I just hit the nail on the head?
Absolutely.
Right, there we go. President of Africa. That's me.
You'd have to go a bit further than that. But it comes back to what I said right at the beginning. There's a thing in economics called comparative advantage. Grow what you're good at, and don't try and grow the things you're not good at. And it's really as simple as that. It's not rocket science. But it does mean a different mindset. There are crops like cassava, for example, are marvelous sorts of starch. Yeah. Marvelous. And those kind of crops grow very, very well.
It's just unfortunate that as you've said, as Dr. Wambugo said as well, that everything seems to come back to politics. It always seems to be the problem. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Gentlemen and gorgeous lady, thank you very much for joining us from our Kenya studio. Dr. Wambugo, thank you very much, Dr. McCrystal. And you and I are the only two who are not doctors, so I can just call you Kulani. Thank you for joining us.